Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Tom Roach. I'm joined by my guest today, Dr. Robert Pippin. Dr. Pippin is a professor of social thought and philosophy at the University of Chicago. Thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
You have a book that came out in 2019 called Filmed Thought, Cinema as Reflective Form. Let's talk about the relationship between thought and film and reflection there. What does that all mean for you?
Well, I start with the premise that there's some sort of governing intelligence behind the making of any film. In the 60s, this was called auteur theory, that the director is the guiding intelligence.
Yeah.
And we now know that films are a much more collaborative enterprise, but there still has to be imputed to the film somebody behind it all deciding what gets left in, what gets out, how it's filmed. And the second premise is we are told stories in films one way rather than another way, and with a certain style rather than another style, for a certain reason. And films, not all films, in fact not most films. Most films are made, the point of making them is to amuse us, to entertain us, to scare us, to give us a thrill.
Right.
But some films are made in a certain way in which they provoke a certain kind of reflection about what it is we just saw, what the meaning is of what we just saw, and how that meaning can have a kind of general significance to an audience that's beyond just the story of a particular character. And the directors I'm interested in are all interested in using film as a way of raising problems that we need to think about or reflect about.
Problems dealing with the human experience. And,
yeah,
and
sure, and especially a lot of what philosophers call issues in moral psychology. What is the meaning of jealousy, resentment, fear, greed, the nature of human law, all kinds of subjects that are treated.
Well, before we get into the directors who are consciously creating that picture for us, is it true to some extent that that every director has a sort of I think you talk about this, a self-knowledge that's sort of built up from their own experiences, and that whether or not they're intending to communicate that or not, it ends up framing what they're doing to some extent?
Yeah, I think the directors who make really philosophically interesting films, and that's only one category of appraisal. There are many good films that aren't like that. But the ones I'm interested in, the director very often is trying to show us that we think we know things that we don't really know. Yeah. Or that we do know things that we think we don't know. I mean, since Socrates, one of the tasks of philosophy is to try to help us understand what we know but can't formalize, can't articulate, can't express. Mm-hmm. And films have such an emotional power that very often they prompt us, not just at an individual level, but collectively for a society at a time. Who do we think we are? How do we get to this point? Why does what matter to us come to matter to us? And is it a good thing that it matters to us? And we can see that in a film in a way that we're directed towards lines of approach where we know that there's some sort of directorial intention behind how we're supposed to take what we're seeing. Yeah.
So, I mean, for somebody who just watches TV sitcoms, things like that, they're basically focusing on the script, the dialogue, the give and take of the actors, the obvious plot. But you're suggesting that we look at more than that, obviously. You're suggesting we look at the other things that are implied by the film, that are suggested by the film, the assumptions that the film's making, things like that.
Right. Very often that's the vehicle for that kind of question is the director's style.
Yeah.
A director has an enormous power over what we see. So what is focused on, what is a close-up, what isn't a close-up, what's an establishing shot, how the movie is paced, what follows what, all of that can be done either to make an effective emotional experience for the viewer and at the same time raise these kind of reflection questions we were just talking about.
Yeah. Well, so let's pick one of these directors here, because in your book I think you have a chapter. You have one film per chapter, with a couple exceptions, maybe. Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of these, I think one of them is Shadow of a Doubt by Alfred Hitchcock, right? So tell us how you see that movie.
Well, Shadow of a Doubt is about a relative of a small family in a peaceful, small Northern California town who comes for a visit, and no one in the family knows that he's a serial murderer, played by Joseph Cotten.
Which is really an unusual subject at that time. It fits right in with what we're doing on television right now, to a great extent.
But so many of the aspects of Hitchcock's films have to do with what we don't know, with what I call in a book I wrote on Vertigo, unknowingness. Yeah. Everybody who knows Hitchcock knows that we're always accusing the wrong person of something. Right. That innocent man is always, we don't ever get it right. The police never get it right.
Starting with the 39 steps.
Oh, right? Absolutely, yeah. There's 100 of them. It's just, they're not really indications of how well we are at knowing who we are and what we're about. And in this one, this guy comes to the small town. No one realizes he's a serial killer except his niece, who begins to realize that But
when he gets there, he's her favorite relative, right?
They have a bond.
All
That's
excited to see him. Yeah.
Another interesting aspect of Hitchcock.
Yeah.
What is the nature of the bond between the niece and why are they so close? It has something to do with her contempt for the small town life she's living. She hates it, and so does he. He hates it in a murderous way, and she hates it in what she thinks of as a fairly innocent way. And they're attracted to each other in a way that is very, if you're noticing it, very unnerving for the viewer. And then the plot of the movie is the gradual uncovering of his nature by her. And then what's most interesting...
Well, the viewer doesn't know he's a murderer right away either.
You do.
Oh, you do?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Well, you know...
because there's a news story.
Yeah. Well, at the very beginning... you see him in Philadelphia being pursued. You know he's a criminal of some kind.
That's right.
Because the police are after him. He has a lot of money that's just strewn around. But then later the FBI comes and she begins to, the murderer we're looking for is one of two men. It could be your uncle, it could be somebody else. But the most interesting thing about the film in terms of sort of a moral philosophical dimension is once she finds out about him being the murderer, she has a ring, she has a piece of evidence that certifies that he's the murderer. His relationship to her mother, his sister, is so deep and intense that she doesn't tell the FBI. And she, in fact, lets him go off with another potential victim rather than interrupt his strategy and try to stop him from doing it. So the film raises this question about what our moral judgment of her should be, why it was so impossible for the people to figure out evil in their midst, that we don't often recognize it in the way we should, and when we do, we don't often do anything about it because we have other allegiances that transcend the moral. So it's a very interesting, kind of dark movie about the limitations of moral judgment. Especially
when you think about when it came out. And it has that very symbolic scene in it where there's a ball or something and they're dancing. Am I thinking of the right way? And they're twirling around and the camera pans back and you just see this sort of image of these little yin-yang black and white circles going around in the ball.
The Merry Widow's Waltz. It really doesn't make any sense in terms of the plot of the movie, but the beginning of the film is this, sort of 19th century clothed people dancing a waltz in his imagination. It's the women he's going to kill. I mean, he's dancing with them as a preparation for killing them. And when she hears that song at a dinner table, she recognizes right away, and she's sort of puzzled by why the Merry Widow Waltz is running around in her head. And it's the first indication that there's this intuition she has about her uncle.
So you have to know the name of the waltz.
Well, I mean,
it helps.
Yeah, it helps to see a Hitchcock film 3 or 4 times.
Yeah. You were saying that he puts in a lot of detail that you're not going to get the first time through.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, in Strangers on a Train, for example, when they meet on the train, one of the guys is reading a book that you can barely see the title of, and it's horror stories selected by Alfred Hitchcock. So sometimes they're jokes.
Which is a joke.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's good. So another one I know you're interested in is Vertigo. Tell us a little bit about what you see in that.
Well, that's the supreme sort of embodiment of the Hitchcock theme of unknowingness. What makes a person the person that we think we know, including self-knowledge? So Jimmy Stewart thinks he's fallen in love with Madeleine Elster, a rich society lady, but she's actually acting the part of Madeleine, who is soon to be dead. And they're trying to create a suicide plot that will get the husband off. The plot is, actually a lot of people don't like Vertigo because the plot is so implausible. A woman impersonating another woman in order to get him.
I'm in that group a little bit.
Yeah, right. Yeah. My own reaction is I don't care. The movie's so stylistically beautiful. And the mood of the kind of confusion caused when we begin to be unsure of who it is we think we're in love with, which is not an uncommon experience in human life. What should we make of that? How could we protect ourselves against it? what do we think about it? All of that's explored in Vertigo in a way that's done with just such elegant style.
Yeah.
Almost pure cinema. It's most of the meaning of the movie is carried visually.
And in some of his other films, do you think he's do you think it's like Hitchcock light? Do you think he has, some of his films are not as interesting as these are? Yeah.
Sure. A lot of the British films, The Lady Vanishes and so forth, and even the mysteries and thrillers like 39 Steps or Sabotage or Saboteur, they're just high works of craft.
Right.
Expertly plotted, expertly timed. They have a light, humorous touch to them that also exists in the American films.
Right.
But once he started making films for Selznick in the 40s, Rebecca, Suspicion, the real nature of Hitchcock's darkness about the human condition, as you say, sort of took over. And our inability to manage what we're confronted with in the human condition and our various strategies of self-deceit and blindness to keep that part of life away from us.
Yeah, and I suppose with North by Northwest and Topaz and some of those, he's getting a little sidetracked with the politics.
Well, in North by Northwest, there's another perfect example of an innocent man accused of being a spy.
Oh, it's great, yeah. And Cary Grant is so good.
Yeah. And then it turns out...
And he's a little bit of a fraud to begin with, right? He's in advertising, and he likes putting people on.
Yeah, exactly.
And
the reference, North by Northwest, of course, a reference to Hamlet. So Hitchcock is telling us, Hamlet also has a problem with knowing who he is. Is he a dutiful son who's going to avenge his father, or is he a civilized man who's not going to commit a murder because he goes to philosophy school in Rotterdam or something? Right. So,
of course, there's more to life than is dreamt of in his philosophy, right?
Hitchcock's letting us know that Hamlet is a reference for the film,
Yeah. Well, so that is one of my favorites. But I suppose it's not as not getting anything as profound as.
No, I think it's equal to Rear Window or.
Well, the bad guys are so two-dimensional at that point. They're. That's what I mean about the politics kind of entering into it, and it seems to me it dilutes it somewhat. It's more cliched.
This is a great example of what Hitchcock. There's always some object they're all after that's actually
the MacGuffin.
Yeah, MacGuffin. There's something they're all after that is actually meaningless. We never learn what the microfilm. Why it's so important. Right. I mean, it's important because everybody wants it, which is a kind of comment on consumerism. That things are important because other people want it. So the idea of there being a Russia-U.S. Cold War kind of thing not very prominent in the film. It's more a question of everybody wants this film because everybody else wants it.
Yeah, I guess you're right. And then, a couple other ones that interest me are Psycho and The Birds. Psycho always seemed a little shallow to me, and I think you disagree with me on this, which is good. I want to hear your explanation on it. Psycho seemed a little shallow to me because it seems to assume that there's this normal world out there, and that Norman Bates is this this kid that's got some psychological problem. And so, he acts that out on that, and then they catch him, and then the psychiatrist comes in at the end and explains everything, and we go back to normal. But I'm just surprised that there's a normal in Hitchcock. So what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, normality is introduced in the movie with Janet Leigh, and the first thing we see is her stealing a lot of money. So it's just
that's a good point.
Hardly any normal, and then the man she's stealing it from is a sort of Texas oil billionaire who's buying something.
It's kind of an old lecher, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, normality there's not much normality in Hitchcock. So when she decides to take the money back and do the right thing, she gets killed. And I think the psychiatrist at the end is ironicized by Hitchcock. I think he's making fun of the patness and the self-satisfaction of the psychiatrist that we all... And then when we go right from the psychiatrist to that incredible scene of Bates turning into his mother and back into Bates again, as if to indicate...
He's thinking about the fly or something.
Yes, right. I wouldn't hurt a fly.
I wouldn't hurt a fly.
We don't understand any of this. None of that explanation made any sense. And who is Norman Bates anyway? Another sort of deep Hitchcockian theme again.
So actually, there's no clean ending.
No,
I can't wait to go see it again.
No clean ending at all. Just the opposite. We should be very, very scared.
Well, that's interesting. Well, anyway, so I get that, and then I kind of had that reaction with The Birds as well. Seeing that as kind of an enactment of the pathetic fallacy theme again. We've disturbed the world in some way, and so nature's reacting. no explanation for it except that, unless you can assume that that's, that that's what's going on. But then that kind of assumes there's a normal world again.
Also, it assumes that terrible things that happen in the world have explanations.
Yeah.
And my view is that the whole point of the birds is they don't. We were talking a little bit before. The studio was same thing with Vertigo.
Yeah.
The studio wanted desperately for him to change the ending of Vertigo because Elster gets away with the murder. So if you go online, you can find. He said, "All right, I'll shoot the other ending." So you can go online and find an ending where he comes back to Midge's apartment and she's got the news on. Jimmy Stewart comes back after the last death, and she's got the news on, and the news says we've captured Elster in France, and because there was still a pretty large Catholic code of conduct from movies, and it was they never allowed the bad guy to get away with anything. So Hitchcock said, "All right, I'll fix it." And then when the film premiered, he didn't show it.
That's interesting.
Same thing with the birds. Just to finish that thought, which is that Hitchcock refused the producer's intention to make them be some explanation for the birds. You can't just show birds attacking people. You have to have like the environmental or nuclear war or something. And Hitchcock said, no, the whole point of the movie is there's no explanation for why the birds are attacking.
Well, that's really interesting. Regarding that code, I thought I remember reading that the Thomas Crown Affair was the first movie to violate that, but actually I guess it would be Hitchcock then if we consider.
Yeah, he got away with it because they couldn't do anything once the movie was cut, so he didn't want to take it back and change it.
Yeah. Well, so what is Hitchcock's self-knowledge then? I mean, if you add all this up, how did he see the world? What's your take on that?
Well, I think he thinks most of our presentations to each other are theatrical. They're staged. We're playing these various roles that we think are necessary. I think, especially in movies made in the 50s and 60s when basically the nature of advanced industrial societies changed and we became much more dependent on the opinions of others for advancement, romance, security, friendship. I mean, we're living in a completely different way than we used to live in agricultural societies where there was just a very small circle of friends.
Right.
And people knew you very intimately. We don't know anybody. I don't know you, you don't know me.
Wow.
We're enacting something here that isn't really part of what would be the case if we'd known each other for 10 years and were neighbors or something. So I think Hitchcock is really aware of how fragile our public identities are.
And things were a little more phony in the 50s, I think, as well, right?
Yeah,
I mean, there was a lot more.
That's one way to look at it. Another way is we're much better at doing the theater now than we were in the 50s.
Oh, yeah. Well, so the 60s were for nothing.
Pretty much. I mean, I'm a 68er, and I don't think we sort of broke through all that at all. I mean, if you look at the power American corporations have over their workers and what they demand of them to do.
Oh, it was unimaginable even back then.
Back then, it was unimaginable. No, you can dictate what they wear, how they wear their hair, whether they can take a bathroom break.
Right. Yeah. See-through purses to make sure they're not stealing.
So people react to that. They assume the persona they think the company wants, the neighbors want, the school wants, and Hitchcock. I think most of his films are terrifying because that can all break down so quickly. And we don't know what's left. We don't know how to reach the core. We don't know that about ourselves either.
Does he ever hint at what he thinks at the core is?
Sin.
Sin?
Sin.
There's no moral
I think
rock
he's,
down there.
Yeah, well, people say he's sort of like a Jansenist Catholic director, but I think he has a very dark vision of what we find when we dig down to the core. We find self-interest, greed, manipulation, self-dishonesty, self-deceit.
Yeah.
He's a pretty dark filmmaker.
Yeah.
And the joke is he made millions of dollars.
Well, I mean, really, I think part of what you're saying is that this is sort of a public sphere dialogue that's going on, but it's being carried on for us in some ways by these movies and these directors who are basically articulating arguments that we are curious about that maybe haven't articulated ourselves, right?
Yeah. I mean, even for the audience, we were talking a little bit before, there can be a huge difference between what we think and what we really think.
Yeah.
And sometimes watching a movie can bring us up short, can let us know that what we think. It's especially true of melodramas in the 50s. I just wrote a book on Douglas Sirk in which, people think of them as sentimental, kind of overdone, over-emotional movies. But I think what he's trying to show us is that when we identify the heroes and villains in these melodramas, we often don't know very effectively what we're doing.
Yeah. I think of Chinatown. when you talk about that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the movie is very consciously, taking apart what we think is going on, and it kind of spirals down, almost like The Big Sleep. The Big Sleep was famous for doing this as well, right?
If you could figure that movie out.
Well, thank you for saying that. Good. I was afraid to bring it up.
I can't even follow the plot.
Okay,
neither could the scriptwriters.
I always think I've got it, and then I get to the end and I think,
who killed Eddie Mars? I mean, nobody can figure out.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But which makes the point. I mean, it's kind of like Hitchcock saying he doesn't want to have to explain why the birds are out there, right? I mean, it's kind of supposed to be inexplicable, I guess, right? And at the end, you get to the end of Chinatown, and they pull Jack away from Jack Nicklaus away from the crime scene, and they say, "It's Chinatown, Jack."
Forget it, Jack. It's Chinatown.
Which means, in that context, it's not explainable, right? It's something that's alien to us. We're not going to get it. Don't think about it. Let's walk away, right?
Well, I don't know what you think, but I think there's an irony in that, in which what they've been saying the whole time is, don't go into Chinatown. That's where all the evil is. We're in Los Angeles. We're fine.
Yeah.
And we're dealing, but actually the public works
Angeles
project, the
so
corruption, and so he says, forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown.
Yeah.
It's an enormous act of blindness, that
Right.
we're not the bad guys.
Yeah.
It's Chinatown.
Yeah.
And I think the whole movie has shown us just how phony that is. But the funny thing about that movie is that most people don't realize that. Most people just think, well, that's right, it's Chinatown. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Whereas actually there's massive corruption and murder in the official hierarchy of Los Angeles.
Right. Yeah. Top to bottom.
Noah Cross, the John Huston character.
Yeah.
Is
Mowry, who I think gives the
he's
water
the
rights
good guy.
to the city, but ends up being, taken advantage of in some
and
ways.
he has a conscience. He wants to fix it. He's not going to build that dam again and have it collapse just for the sake of the money.
And he loses completely.
Yeah, so they kill him.
Yeah, and it loses.
It's not Chinatown. It's Los
family.
Angeles.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, that's a good point about that. And some other movies that are kind of like that. Maltese Falcon, I think of in that context.
Yeah. I read a book on film noir in which I tried to say that movie destabilizes, undermines our sense of what it is to be an agent. We tend to think of being an agent as I form an intention based on what I observe about the facts in the world, and then I execute the intention.
Right.
And most of what film noir indicates is we don't really understand what the situation is, and we don't understand our own intentions. We think we're committed to X, and we end up doing Y.
Yeah.
Sometimes not X. So there's a kind of darkness in film noir as well about, it's kind of a pairing with the book I wrote once about Westerns, which is about the pre-legal situation and what psychological change is necessary in order to accept the rule of law, which most Westerns are about. And film noir is sort of about the post-legal world, where the legal world is so corrupt, run by criminals, corruption, graft, everything, where we can't really count on there being an effective moral force. We're on our own.
Just quickly here at the end, what do you make out of Quentin Tarantino? He's kind of one of the most influential writers and directors today. I found that I was disappointed in everything after Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs. Was there more of a sense of what he was about and what he thought in those first two movies? Or?
Well, I think that I agree with you that those are his two best movies, and that they're extremely powerful.
Yeah.
But they're powerful because he invented a unique style, a kind of hip, cool indulgence of violence that you see all the way into Succession, where the TV series, where it's the sort of language of corruption that's so. But the movies aren't about anything. They're referential to other movies, and they're celebratory of mere style, but they're all celebrations of how hip Quentin Tarantino is. So I think they're empty. But I get in a lot of trouble. He's got a huge following among intellectuals in Europe. So
really?
Yeah, he's really.
Well, so does Jerry Lewis. What are you going to say?
Actually, those films, the films he made, actually are pretty good.
You think?
Yeah, right. They're compared to Tarantino, anyway.
Yeah. Oh, maybe. I know there's some other directors you talk about. Did you want to mention a couple of them? We got about 30 seconds left here, just to let our viewers know what they might want to look at. Yeah,
well, there are some a Belgian team that does kind of social realism films that are very, very powerful, called the Dardenne brothers. Lorna's Silence, The Sun, the Infant. Anyone interested in a really powerful, not art films really, just really very powerful social dramas of what immigrant society, people who are living on the margins of society, have to go through in ordinary life. You should check out the Dardenne brothers.
Okay, well, that's very good. That's all the time we have for our program. I want to thank Dr. Robert Pippin for joining me today on the Roundtable Perspective. I'm Tom Roach. See you next time.